5, 4, 3, 2, 1. KenCast.
Hey everyone, welcome to KenCast. It's another Saturday. It's a week after our epic live stream that covered the season 5 trailer of Cobra Kai. We are going to talk about that in just a second. But first, I want to thank you all for joining us today. We have a very fun discussion ahead of us. We're going to be talking about Chozen. Chozen, this great villain from Karate Kid 2, and that has come back now. We saw him a little bit in season 3 of Cobra Kai, and now he's coming back as a full hero in season 5 of Cobra Kai. So we're going to talk about Chozen. Who is this guy? And I'm interested to hear your thoughts as well today in the chat. Is Chozen someone that you just got to know through the Cobra Kai series, or were you a longtime fan since Karate Kid 2? So we're looking forward to all your comments today. And first, though, I want to bring in our wonderful guest, Drew Rohaly. Drew, it is wonderful to see you again.
Hey, Ken. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me again. I said it last time, but it's always an honor to join the KenCast.
Well, it is great to have you here. Drew, of course, is co-host of the Last Row podcast. That's another podcast he does on the side. It goes into all kinds of great movies from the 80s, 90s, even through more recent times, movies that you forgot you loved. Drew, can you tell people about Last Row podcast a bit?
Yeah, me and my co-host Badway, we do a lot of fan favorite movies. We just did this past week. We did the movie Big back from the 80s. I guess we grew up in the 80s and 90s, so that's typically what we tend to do. But we don't necessarily just review the movie. We kind of talk about what's happening inside of the movie. We speculate on some of the characters' lives and what's going on behind the scenes. We've got some fun theories that we do. In fact, we had a bombshell of a theory this past week on our Big episode, which maybe McMillan was also someone who used the Zoltar machine. So fun stuff like that. But if you enjoy the 80s, you like Karate Kid and all that, definitely check our show out, thelastrowpodcast.com. We'd love to have you check it out and let us know if you have any feedback. So thanks, Ken.
Absolutely. And we've got a link to Last Row Podcast, their website, down in the description. Great to see you guys. Emu Billy, yo, what's up? How you guys doing? Look, we've got Peter.
Hey, Peter.
Hey, Peter, how's it going? Cobra Kai Companion Podcast. We're going to get back to that in just a second. And I'm gassed, the spirit of Chozen from the future. And it does look like we've got a lot of fans of Chozen here in the chat.
That's awesome.
Well, Corbin says Terry Silver is going to dominate. And of course, as you know, Drew is part of the Terry Silver Brain Trust. He is one of the original fans and expert of Terry Silver. So, Drew, you probably can't argue with Terry Silver dominating, right?
I'm Team Terry. I mean, I love Chozen too, but it's hard not to be Team Terry when you got a villain as amazing as Terry Silver. There's only one person, I guess, that can go up against him, and maybe it is Chozen.
Indeed. Peter says he's a long fan of Chozen since the late 80s, and he's also a big fan of us. Oh, thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Stuart says I need that Zoltar machine.
I saw one out in San Francisco. I didn't put a coin in and test if it was real, but I did see one out in San Francisco a long time ago, Stuart.
That's awesome. That's great. Daniel says, nice haircut, Ken. Well, Daniel, just to let you know, I just got this like less than an hour ago. I just got this. It's going a little long this month, so had to get it. Here's Robana. As much as I'm a huge fan of Terry, I'll be rooting for Chozen. So okay, so everyone's talking about this, Drew, because of last week, about where we got this new trailer. We got actually let's just get into news.
KenCast news.
I love it.
News. Yeah.
I love it.
Oh, good. Well, guys, it's we'll just do some news here. Okay, so the first news, it's kind of not new. You might have seen this. This was our epic live stream from last week. You might have seen my new kind of shortened breakdown of the trailer that I released yesterday. Definitely check that out. But last week, if you want the full live analysis with Peter from Cobra Kai Companion Podcast, click on the link in the description. Drew, first off, let's just talk about your reaction, just your thoughts, remembering this a week ago. It's set for a while. Do you have any takeaways or thoughts from last week?
I think, we broke it down, I think, frame by frame, essentially. And first off, thanks for having me on the show. It was awesome. And it was great to be able to talk with Peter, too. We had such a fun time breaking down the trailer. So if you haven't watched that, go check it out. And Ken, you did a shorter video, too, which sort of summarizes that. But I think it was a lot of fun because we were able to kind of look what we think is happening behind the frames, getting a sense of maybe where is Terry Silver? He's kind of back on top, which, as a huge Terry Silver enthusiast, I'm not going to complain about that. But then we also had gasoline getting thrown on the fire, which brings us to Chozen and the introduction of these two amazing characters to each other, and maybe a golf club, the country club that you mentioned. And I think it's the interesting thing about that is, it's the first time we've seen these two interact with each other. So
Yes.
as a fan of the Karate Kid universe, and as much of your viewers and the folks in the chat are thinking, holy crap, is really kind of what I think about. I took a step back and thought, this is going to be epic. As much as I love season 4, season 5 I haven't been this hyped in a long time, put it that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I want to get back into this part of the discussion with you later, this idea of we've got Terry Silver meeting Chozen.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this is going to be kind of like an interesting discussion point. After we kind of review who Chozen is, Emu Billy says feels like we're entering a Karate Kid multiverse with all these characters.
Yeah,
I kind of agree. I mean, you really could. I could see there being not that there will be. I could see there being a Terry Silver series. I could see there being a Chozen series. Like you could go off with these characters and they could have their own rich stories. I don't know. What do you think, Drew? Would you watch those?
I would love that because I think, I never thought we'd get what we were getting right now, which is incredible. And when you think about where they could go with it, there's definitely a lot of money to be made, but also a lot of, I think, a lot of fun stuff they could do with the characters that, we probably haven't seen before. I'd love to see what Chozen's been up to since we last saw him in Karate Kid 2. We got a little bit of hints of that. And then Terry, right? What was he doing in the time what was between this? We got some really old flashbacks back in Vietnam. We haven't had a chance to really see too much, and maybe we'll get some of that these particular seasons, but I would love to see spin-off shows. I would absolutely watch those, and I think a lot of fans probably would too.
Yeah, I totally agree. And please let us know what your thoughts are in the comments, Peter. It's a multiverse for sure. We have two different Miyagi's. Oh yeah, you're right. Because he has 2 different first names depending on that. That's a good
really catch.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's a really good catch. Guys, thank you for your comments. Jump in on the comments. We love to hear you. Robana says, I think he'll help out Daniel and not Silver. He's got to have some resentment towards Silver. Oh, that's Mike Barnes. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's another whole great discussion too. Well, we'll get back to talking about Chozen in just a second. Let's pull up some other news. So we've got Karate Kid, the musical, is coming out in a month. Now, okay, so this is just a news story. It's like basically it's premiering in St. Louis, and it says nearly 40 years after its original release, the martial arts classic Karate Kid is taking on a new life as Broadway-style musical. So it'll premiere later this month, kicking off the 36th season of stages in St. Louis, if you're in St. Louis. Robert Mark Kamen, who penned the screenplay, he worked with lyricist Drew Gasparini on the musical's creative team. So, Drew, okay, this is interesting for a number of reasons. One, Peter Bonasak, who was with us last week, he did an interview with Robert Mark Kamen. Go check out Cobra Kai Companion. I put some information in the description. Listen to that interview. That it's pretty rare to get an interview with Robert Mark Kamen. He's the guy who created the Karate Kid movies. He created this whole thing. But Drew, what do you think? Having this iconic 80s movie that I know you love, it's now a stage musical. What do you think about that?
I think it just shows the cultural significance of this, as kind of silly as that sounds. I really think it shows how far the Karate Kid universe and the lore and the fandom has kind of permeated pop culture. And I think it's really cool that it's finally getting almost like more spin-offs and more respect than, maybe it has in the previous, 20, 30 years since the new show came out. Because you had this amazing series of movies come out back in the 80s. there was huge fans of this, and and I don't want to say they're cult classics because the first and second were huge movies. Maybe the third was a cult classic, but the cool thing about this is that you're starting to see the same characters and the same universe in different mediums, and a musical is a cool thing, right? I mean, I think was it 10 years ago they did like that Spider-Man musical on Broadway that got ultimately shut down, but
Mhm.
when something becomes a musical, I think it's kind of made it in a way,
Yes.
even though it's had a huge amount of success. But I think it's cool. It goes back to the cultural significance, I think, of the characters and the impact that this series has had on so many fans. And I hope it does well because if it comes to the East Coast here, I know it's in St. Louis, but if it comes here, I think I might have to go check it out.
Well, the thing is, I was going to ask you about that because we
Yeah,
talked about all these events happening on the West Coast. If it's on the East Coast, I might have to go out and see it,
yeah.
and maybe
Hook
we'll
me
have
up, man.
to. Yeah, maybe we'll have to just go do it.
Yeah.
And we'll let everyone know. I think that would be fun. Stuart Young, amazing. Back to the Future musical was fantastic. I never saw that.
I've never seen that, and I love Back to the Future, so that's awesome. I have to go check that out. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Talking Straight with Nate. Hey,
Hey, Nate.
I met Nate at Netflix is a Joke. It's great to see you, Nate. Thanks for watching. Um, okay, so let's we've got some more news. Okay, William Christopher Ford. Okay, he is the actor who played Dennis in Karate Kid 3. He is going to be interviewed by me this week. Probably around Friday, I'm going to release it. But this is just a great interview. This is I dive into Karate Kid 3 with him. We talk about his background, how he became interested in martial arts. He has all kinds of behind the scenes stories, and I ask him directly if Dennis will be appearing in Cobra Kai.
Yeah.
So people who are into these characters from Karate Kid 3, definitely check out this interview with William Christopher Ford. It is going to be amazing. So Drew, just so what does this character of Dennis mean to you? We talk about Terry Silver, and then there's Snake and Dennis. What does this character of Dennis mean to you as a fan?
The cool thing is, like, I don't know, when people we talk about how Karate Kid 3 didn't get a lot of respect for many, many years. I think it's cool to see, William Christopher Ford getting some props here too. I know he's very active in the community and the fandom. And in fact, I think you met him at Paley Fest, right? Which is so cool. And
Yes.
he seems like an amazing person, and the character is cool too. Even though he didn't have like such a huge role in the movie, he was one of we call it almost like a silver henchman in Karate
Hmm.
Kid 3, right? So if
Right.
he shows back up, I wonder what type of role he's gonna be playing. Because
Right.
did he have an arc where he became good after the movie? Like, we won't
Right.
know. And what kind of role, if he were to show up in the next season, would he still be working with Terry? It would be kind of awesome to see him as a sensei at the new Cobra Kai dojo too, which would be pretty awesome. But I love these sort of side characters, and as a huge fan of Karate Kid 3, being able to kind of speculate on what might have happened since the movie is always a little bit of fun to have with these characters.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting because everyone who's interested in this, definitely watch this interview, because he goes into, not only does he kind of answer my question as much as he can about whether he's going to appear in Cobra Kai. He talks a little bit about his ideas about the character himself, and also his thoughts about the Cobra Kai series.
That's awesome.
So yeah, everyone check this out. Everyone who's a Karate Kid fan, definitely check this interview out. Now, here's another. We talked about this before, but this is Drew's podcast, Last Row Podcast, guys. If you're into 80s like Johnny, Johnny would probably be interested in listening to some of these Last Row Podcast episodes, because they just dive into. I mean, you guys do Steven Seagal movies, you do lots of stuff, but this time you're doing classic Tom Hanks. You're doing big.
I think this is the first Tom Hanks movie that we've actually done on the show, if
Mhm.
I'm remembering correctly, and we had fun with it. Like, one of the things that I didn't know this before watching this we're doing our episode, was the fact that there was a bunch of other actors that were almost cast as Josh Baskin, one being Robert De Niro, which to me would not work very well. I think Tom Hanks has this sort of childlike innocence about him, and he plays it so well. I mean, the picture there, right? Like, I don't
Mhm.
get it. Could you imagine Robert De Niro saying that? It would be more threatening. Whereas I think when Tom Hanks says it, it's a little bit more innocent. But it's really, really fun. We had a blast talking about this movie. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but
Right.
this movie is one of my favorites growing up. I've watched this thing so many times. I don't know about you, but it's such a
Yeah.
fun movie in a lot of ways.
Oh, it's classic. I mean, in that scene where they're, playing the floor piano and just,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, I don't know. That's iconic. I think it's an iconic scene.
You
So,
have to come and listen to my co-host Badway's Robert Loggia impression too. That's the really the gem of the episode. I think he does a mean Robert Loggia, and I didn't know this until last week, so he really surprised me. But he knocked that out of the park. So go check it out.
oh, that's fun. All right. So everyone definitely check out that episode, Last Row Podcast. Now, before we get into our main discussion, we have a question from Detective Bat. Do you think
Man.
Terry will be in season 6 of Cobra Kai? Drew?
I certainly hope so, Ken. I certainly hope so.
Right. Well, but this is, we're going to be talking a lot about Chozen here in a minute, but we love Terry Silver, and he looks like he's such a big figure in season 5. So a lot of fans like us, Drew, are wondering, I mean, is he going to be around in season 6? Pictures, of Thomas Ian Griffith show shorter hair, not the ponytail. I think that has a lot of people concerned. Do you think, how do you see this? Do you see any possibilities here?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways this could go. I certainly hope that nothing happens to Terry. I mean, we could speculate Chosen kills Terry or something crazy like that. I certainly hope that doesn't happen. But I think it just depends on the type of arc they're going to give him, because maybe I saw someone wrote on Twitter, or maybe it was the comments of your videos. There was
Mhm.
something about, hey, did they officially greenlight season 6? I don't recall if it's been that way or not. They can
I
certainly give him like a wig or like a clip-on ponytail. I think we joked about that many years ago, that there's definitely
Right.
clip-ons, but the real thing's always better. But I
Right.
certainly hope he's in it. If something happens where he's away, it could be maybe that's where they take it. I don't
Right.
know. What do you think?
You know, I'll be honest. I had a very in-depth conversation with my wife, Amber, about this, because I had her, because I got to meet him at Paley Fest, and we have the pictures of him there with his hair. It's a little shorter,
Yep.
and I asked her, because she's kind of like the resident expert in our house with like fashion and hair and all that kind of stuff. And I asked her, what's the possibility? What could happen here? Would they put hair extensions and stuff like that? And she seemed to think, well, if they haven't started shooting yet, or they don't know when they're going to start shooting yet, it looks like it's at a length
Yeah.
where he could grow it back out.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and I like that answer.
Yeah.
I
Your
like that
wife's a
answer.
very smart person. I
Yeah.
mean, look, I haven't gotten a haircut since February 2020, and it's taken me a long time to get it get it to this level.
Yes.
And I think certainly he could do it, but there's also probably story reasons. Like maybe you talk about honor, maybe Chosen like cuts his ponytail off or something crazy like that, and it becomes part of the story. Be kind of
Yeah,
cool.
I love that solution too. That has me excited, because
Yeah.
Chosen's all about honor, and and we'll talk about Chosen and his ability maybe to get into Terry's head a little later, because I don't think people are thinking about that yet.
Yeah.
A lot of people. Bryce Production says maybe Terry will go to prison and Dugan will return, and then Terry gets out of prison at the end of season 6. That could happen too.
That could be fun.
That could be great. And Peter says, and he's the expert, the producers, the Big Three's original outline was for 6 seasons, and since the move to Netflix, they've stopped saying 6. No official announcement yet.
Yeah.
And when I was at the Netflix is a Joke event, Hayden Schlossberg, who's one of the creators, made 2 very kind of pointed references to, we've got to save it for season 6, in a way that was almost like a joke, but it was almost like a soft confirmation of season 6. So
I can't imagine now, with how popular this show has become, and we've talked about some of the Netflix troubles. Like, I can't imagine that there would be a situation where they wouldn't greenlight a season 6. This seems to be the type of show that it And I don't know the financials or really the politics or whatever happens behind the scenes, but I can't imagine a scenario where they wouldn't greenlight this. It has such a huge fandom and it's such a major success. And they,
Mhm.
you know, to Peter's point, like they went out and got this show from YouTube Premium and whatnot, right? So I just can't imagine a scenario, and maybe this is my wishful thinking and hope that it doesn't, you know, go away. But unless this season craters, which it would be, I can't imagine that would ever happen. I
No.
can't see how they wouldn't have a season 6, so I'm
Right.
crossing my fingers.
Right. And I'll just offer this out there. I think that the continuing success of Cobra Kai as a series can only be helped by keeping Terry Silver around.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean,
that's
they've built up to him to this point where, you know, you wondered where he was for so long, and then he came out of nowhere. To have him maybe for a season and a half or something, it might feel almost like a waste of the character, and I think knowing the show's creators and showrunners and the writers, how much they respect Terry, I think
yeah.
as a character and they're huge fans of it themselves, you gotta hope they have got a long-term plan for him, which I think they do.
Right, exactly. Stuart says, "I guess it depends when season 6 will be filmed," which is right. They're working on a whole different series this summer. So I don't know when they're going to shoot it. It's possible they could start shooting season 6, you know, even in
Sure.
January or something like that, you know. So and then Peter's, I didn't know this. There's a fan art with Chosen cutting
That's
Terry's
awesome.
ponytail, which I love fans. I love the fans. My
Yeah.
gosh. They're so amazing. Okay. Well, Drew, perhaps it's time to get into our main discussion for today.
KenCast discussion.
I was hoping that was coming.
Oh, you know it's coming, all right. Oh, you know it's coming. All right. Here we go, guys. Now we're talking about Chosen. Now, in order to discuss Chosen, I know a lot of you have just seen Chosen for the first time in the Cobra Kai series. We're going to go all the way back to 1986. This is when this character was introduced to the world in the Karate Kid Part 2. And Drew, just from your own sense of like the 80s, could you kind of put this in the context of the 80s, like following the first one? So the first one was a classic, right?
Mhm.
And how would you describe kind of like this movie's impact in the 80s and the idea that a sequel is coming along?
Yeah, we've had a lot of good discussions about sort of 80s sequels and how when you make a sequel, it's almost like how do you dial it up? How do you make it bigger? How do you make it more epic? And especially in the 80s, right, where you've got like this excess and all this stuff and you've got the first movie which was sort of set within a very particular place in California obviously, right? And you
Mhm.
had sort of a very specific scope of this thing. How do you make it bigger? How do you make it crazier? Okay, let's take them to Japan. And I think the piece of this as a sequel, I always thought this one was, I don't wanna say it's better than the first one because I think when you talk about a movie like Ghostbusters, you and I have talked about this before.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters 1 is obviously the best movie. It's set in a very particular scope. It's a great classic. 2 obviously gets a lot of hate or maybe not as much love, to put it a different way. The
Mhm.
Karate Kid 2 to me, I think actually I don't wanna say it's a better movie, but I do think it's a better movie. It's not as classic as the first one, but this is the one that I always liked, you know, better than the first just because it was so different, and we got to see more about who Mr. Miyagi is,
Mm.
and I think he was such a cool character in the first one. You don't get a lot of background on him. You get maybe the newspaper clippings, he tells a few stories and whatnot, but it was more about Daniel. As much as Karate Kid 2 is about Daniel kinda navigating a new culture, new place, new things to see and do, it's all about Mr. Miyagi and what is his background, where does he come from, and I think that you get to expand the lore, which is, I think, a really cool part of this movie. I'm curious, where does it stand in your pantheon of movies? Do you think it's better than the first?
You know, it's really tough to say for me because when I first saw the movie, I remember when I was very young and kids were debating whether part one or part two was better. And I hadn't seen either of them at this point. And at one point, this was on the Disney Channel. And I watched it and I taped it. And then that's how I got introduced to this whole universe. And I must have watched that hundreds of times
Yeah.
on tape. I just love the Karate Kid too. I probably Honestly, I probably watched it at least 20 to 25 times before I ever saw the first one.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that, we sometimes saw with movies. Like I remember Superman 2 did it.
Oh
But
yeah.
in this, like, I mean, huge credit to the recap at the beginning. It was so good that I knew exactly who all the characters were and I knew their backgrounds. I didn't need to see the first one to really understand what was going on in the second one. And
Yeah.
that was just, I don't know, that opening sequence, and there's another one in Karate Kid 3, but I thought that was really great. And we don't see that a lot nowadays.
I think it's an amazing way to tie movies of a series together that you're right, you don't really see that. Like, even we talk about Ghostbusters 1 and 2, right? You don't really get that in Ghostbusters 2. They just go to the kids' party and whatnot,
Right.
and you kinda, okay, these guys must be down on their luck, but this, it's almost like you could watch these people did, when the new Marvel movies come out, like when the Avengers movies come out, people say like, "Hey, let's have this crazy marathon," and they'll do, 8 to 10 movies in a row for 3 days in a row. You could probably stitch these together, and I mean, I'm sure it's been done. Stitch
Mhm.
these together and it flows from one to the next to the next one. It's a true trilogy in a way, and I love
Right.
the way that they tied them together that way. It's a really cool way to do it, especially like you said, without having the background of one. Oh, you don't really need to see that. This is who these guys are. This is what happened, and this is why they're here. And
Right.
then it goes into its own story, which is awesome, which I like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for kids, like out of that time, and at least where I was, growing up in, around the Boston area,
Mhm.
6 or 7 years old, like this was really my first kind of window or introduction into Southeast Asian culture. Like, and, whether that's good or bad, I mean, it was definitely an impactful movie from that regard. Like, this is
Yeah.
the first time I actually kind of watched these characters like in Mr. Miyagi's country. And you could kind of look at it through Daniel's eyes as he kind of goes on this epic trip that, I had never been, I hadn't really never been on a
Yeah.
plane flight like that. And,
Sure.
you know, and and that was just very interesting. So this movie, you're right. It's like in a way, it's more interesting than the first movie, I think. And financially, the first one was a huge hit. It made 91 million at the box office, and then this came out. It's actually a bigger hit. It made 119 million at the box office, but the reviews were a bit more mixed, like 44% on Rotten Tomatoes and 6.1 out of 10 on IMDb.
I think the trouble with a sequel is that you have so many expectations of what people want it to be, and you're never gonna be able to meet everyone's expectations, and it's a
Right.
little sad in that regard because I don't know, I think just me as a movie fan in general, I tend to enjoy most things that I watch. It takes a really, really bad movie or a really bad, really
Right.
bad writing or something for me to not enjoy it on some level, and I
Right.
think this one, because it was so different, I thought it was so cool, but I'm sure that that set people off. They probably didn't wanna see Daniel Miyagi in a different country. They probably didn't wanna see, but I don't know how else you could have done it because what else could you do? It's like, okay, here's another tournament. They kinda did that with 3, but I think it made more sense as the 3rd one in the trilogy. You kind of take people away, put them in a different scenario. We talk
Hmm.
about Star Wars a lot. The first one, you take Empire. Empire is completely different than the first one, and
Right.
it sort of rounds out the trilogy better, I think, personally. So I like that it was somewhere else separately.
Absolutely. And Peter says Karate Kid 2 did amazing financially well, but that's because it was a sequel to Karate Kid.
Yeah.
Most of my life, people said they didn't like it. The Karate Kid Part 2 is my Back to the Future Part 3. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those things where I could see that. Like, I don't know. It's weird. As a kid, I remember kids didn't matter. It didn't matter to the kids.
Yeah.
Like, they'd watch them both. And
Yeah.
like, and maybe there is something to the idea that after seeing the first one, the second one is too different. It's not what they expected, and they didn't like it as much. But for me, it's opposite because I saw the second one first.
Yeah. I thought just because it was different, it was you can watch it and it's like, what mood are you in? Oh, cool. Do you want to see them out of their element and them going off to kind of have their own adventure? You learn a little bit more about Mr. Miyagi. Cool. Watch the second one. If you want to see more of the classic, then you watch the first. And I think it doesn't, the second one doesn't erase the first. And I think that's a lot of times, and we talked about this with Karate Kid 3. You don't like Karate Kid 3? Cool. Don't watch it. And I think like
Mhm.
the first one and the second one exist. And I think people tend to get really invested in this to the point where they get really upset. And I think I can understand the disappointment, but at the same
Mhm.
time, it's just another movie and it expands the lore and it expands the characters and what they're all about. And I think to me that's really interesting, regardless of where they take it. So
Absolutely. Emo Billy says the ice breaking
yeah.
scene with Sado watching and knowing Daniel was going to break the ice was iconic. Totally agree. And it also really raised the stakes. Peter says he interviewed Yuji. He's interviewed everyone on Cobra Kai Companion podcast. I asked him for his opinion on why part 2 isn't as well received. He thinks it's because there are no Cobras. And maybe if that's the case, maybe that's because people feel like they can't relate to, it's not like their own school experience. It's harder to relate to that. I'm not sure.
Part of me thinks like that's a cool thing because we got the Cobras and now we're getting these other guys that, I mean, think about the Cobras, right? They're students and that's a cool aspect of this, but this is like these folks are ingrained in the culture of the village that they're in, and the stakes are even higher. And that's what I liked about Karate Kid too,
Right.
which is cool.
Right. Jorge says, I enjoy Karate Kid 2 more than the original, but it's sort of an oddball in the Miyagi-verse in that Cobra Kai aren't the main antagonists along with New Karate Kid. And it's kind of like, it's interesting. You're absolutely right, Jorge. And Dave's, Dave Srock. I want to mention Dave. Dave's an amazing filmmaker. How's it going, Dave? Conti's amazing. But I like that because it's like you're elevating everything.
The stakes are higher, big time.
Way higher. Yeah. And the world just got so much bigger.
Well, I mean, you don't have a fight to the death in the All Valley. Like, I think death would be a crime there, like a murder. Whereas in this village, hey, man, you're going to challenge this guy to a fight. You better be prepared to die. And I think that's pretty epic. It's pretty epic when you think about it. So,
yes, I totally agree. And Bryce Production says Karate Kid 2 is my favorite.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you, Bryce. Well, let's dive into this a little bit. We've got so let's kind of recap. Why are we talking about Chozen today? Well, he showed up big time in the season 5 trailer. We saw him at the end of season 4. Now he's squaring off against Terry Silver, who's this epic enemy that we all absolutely love. But who was he? And if you guys haven't seen Karate Kid 2, we've just been talking about Karate Kid 2. We first saw Chozen in Karate Kid 2 once they got off the plane in Okinawa, and Chozen greeted them at the airport and just posing as a driver. We didn't know who he was. He seemed to be a little menacing. He shook Daniel's hand a little too hard. And then they took them to a warehouse, this dark warehouse, and Sato came out. And Sato was Miyagi's old best friend. They had a huge tiff over the fiance, Miyagi's true love, and Sano's honor was insulted by that, and he still holds it against Miyagi. And Chozen was kind of his nephew. Chozen looked up to Sato. He kind of, I don't know, would you call him, henchman's the wrong word. I mean, it was his nephew, but it's almost like he was sort of like the young muscle or student for Sato. How would you describe Chozen?
On the villain scale, you maybe have to consider him as a henchman, but he really is more than a henchman. I think calling him a henchman kind of, it almost dishonors him, for lack of a better word.
Right.
He's much more than a henchman. He's a sub boss, is what I would call it. And you could actually argue he's the boss of this movie because Sato's not fighting anybody, whereas Chozen's out there. He's gonna kick Daniel's butt and to the death. So I think he's a menacing character. You could tell by the handshake. The handshake says it all, and that's the reveal there. But he's an epic character. But the way you mentioned, you get introduced to him. You're not sure about this guy. It's like, what's this guy all about? And it's a little menacing in a way, but I think like the mystique of it is really cool. This is the way they introduce him.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, it's almost like it starts off with Sato and Miyagi have this problem, and then Chozen sort of inherits it, or he takes his side, but then eventually he and Daniel start to have problems and tiffs, like there was the whole flap about the Chozen's actually cheating people.
Yeah.
Like in the village
or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yes. He's cheating people. So, I mean, he's not just like a mean guy. He's kind of a criminal. Like he's stealing from people and making extra money. And Daniel exposes him. That, I guess, insults his honor. And then he doesn't like Daniel. And then there's the whole ice breaking thing where he loses the bet because Daniel breaks all 6 of the ice and he's disgraced in the eyes of his uncle. And so they're like, it becomes this very complicated family honor, embarrassment, disgrace in the community thing that Daniel did to Chozen, which is very different than the first movie. There are a lot of deeper issues going on here. I don't know, Drew, does that hit a stronger chord with you?
Yeah, I think the cool thing about this is that it shows how layered and nuanced this character is versus like, and I'm not saying Johnny wasn't in the first and the Cobras weren't. It's just that, like we talked about taking it to a different level.
Right.
The level of this is family honor, trying to look up to your or trying to look good in the eyes of your uncle in the village. The stakes are so much higher. This is this guy's life. Like this is what he's all about. And
Right.
we don't know how much of that was his uncle sort of kind of pushing it on him versus him just wanting to live up to this. What kind of life did he have growing up? I think that's what makes this character so interesting. And subsequently the arc that he's had since the movie came out and where he's at right now in the Cobra Kai series. So
Right.
I think it's really cool. I mean, you mentioned the cheating out the villagers.
Mhm.
I have to reference the villains wiki here. Shout out to the kind people at the villains wiki, because they list out his crimes and his goals and the crimes that he has. I mean, you mentioned this guy's pretty
Oh,
nuanced. He's
actually,
got
Drew,
Do you have
I
it?
got it for you.
All right, there you go. I mean, he falls under the evildoer category, and this is the 1986 version, not the 2021 one, which is important.
Right.
But if you go to his areas, like his hobbies, right? He's hobbies are fighting, being devoted to his uncle, harassing Daniel, bragging about honor, his powers and skills, martial arts, charisma. I can't argue that he's a pretty charismatic guy. Physical
Right.
strength, manipulation, business management, brutality. And then his crimes, right? You mentioned harassment, attempted murder. I guess technically he did
Right.
assault, blackmail, conspiracy, vandalism. I mean, this is it's a pretty good rap sheet here of
It is.
things that he did.
Yes.
But it's a pretty intense character, and it's just on a different level than Karate Kid 1, where Johnny was, he's a bully in school. This is a different
Right.
type of bully. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah, this is I love that you bring up the villains wiki. Everyone listen to the Last Row podcast. You bring this up in the Terry Silver, your original Terry Silver episode, where you go through, and I think it's absolutely amazing because the villains wiki just basically sums it up for you. And you can see all these reasons why Chozen is a villain. And we're going to get back to this later because that stacks up with Terry Silver. And you're right. He's legit. Let me see. Let me bring in a couple comments here. Karate Kid 2 could have ended with to be continued because part 2 definitely followed through very well, unlike Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah.
Right. Ghostbusters 2, there was that big 5-year gap.
Mm-hmm.
Peter thinks part 2 is more emotional and dramatic. Maybe people wanted more fun. That's definitely
I like the
possible
drama
too.
and the emotion, man. I love the aspect of it. The stakes are so much higher, like we said.
Right. Exactly. And then, people have been talking about this. Dude says got here late and buzzed from tequila. Chozen versus Terry will be epic. I hope there's another ice-breaking scene too. It's almost like they have to reference that.
They have to. If there's a steam room, there's gotta be ice-breaking scene. If they're gonna bring in Terry in the towel, come on.
Right. Exactly. And then when I was first introduced to Chozen part 2, I always thought he was racist towards Daniel. And maybe there is that aspect that he's definitely an outsider. Like this is not, obviously he is not Miyagi's son or grandson, and that could have different implications. But one more thing I wanted to point out about Chozen 2, Drew, is that Sato doesn't have any children, and so it's almost like Chozen's his son in a way, and his son and heir in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And then Chozen doesn't appear to have his parents around. He really hangs around his uncle all the time. So there's some interesting family history and dynamics there that might be influencing things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And the fact that it's his uncle, I don't know if that adds more complexity to it because, like you said, his parents aren't there.
Right.
He is sort of an heir because, and I think we find that inadvertently, we kind of find that out throughout this the gap between the way the show ended and where they're at now. But I think that definitely adds another layer and another dynamic, a piece of dynamic to their relationship and kind of where he is. And one thing I just have to point out, because I'll probably forget, but I grew up watching these movies and I was talking to Peter about this actually, but the actor Yuji, he's
Yes.
also in a movie with anyone else who was born in like the 80s, 90s has seen this on the Disney Channel,
Uh-huh.
Johnny Tsunami, and he plays Johnny Tsunami's dad, he's also married to Mary Page Keller,
Yes.
Thomasine Griffith's wife.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when I remember watching this back in the day, I kept thinking, "Oh my god, Johnny Tsunami's dad is Chozen, and his grandfather is Shang Tsung from the Mortal Kombat series." So you talk about a small world. I love the connection that they have within these movies. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that, but it's a classic in my household.
I'll be honest, I have never seen Johnny Tsunami. I need to watch it though because I've heard people talk about it. So
It's a TV Disney movie. I mean, it's one of those, so just go in with those expectations, and I think you'll
sure.
enjoy it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, um, here's another thing I'd like to bring up about Chosen before we move forward. He is really well dressed. His uncle's rich. He apparently is getting some of his uncle's money. So like all of Daniel's antagonists, you've got Johnny, but then you have Chosen, who's probably even richer than Johnny, and then
Mhm.
Terry Silver's obviously mega rich. But Chosen, he likes the style. He's got those gold chains. Always has great clothes, and he has money, which does remind me, Drew, of Terry Silver.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
There's a lot to be paralleled there, I think, and I'm curious what his money situation is gonna be in the current season because Daniel's obviously rich. He's got all the auto dealerships and he's got a lot of money. He's wealthy, whereas he wasn't back in the original movie series. But now that you've got Terry and his seemingly unlimited funding and his ability to just buy anything, we talked about him being sort of the evil Bruce Wayne back in the day.
mhm,
But having said that, like, is Chosen one that can go toe to toe with him financially?
right.
Maybe he can, and maybe that's how they're going to open almost competing dojos now that we think that Miyagi-Do might be closed down. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch, I think, in this upcoming season.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Philomena says Karate Kid 2 is a role reversal almost. This and Mr. Miyagi's letter in the Cobra Kai shows what Daniel meant to him and did for him. They are both at the heart of the legacy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. RJ, hey, what's up, RJ? Good to see you. Thank you guys for watching today. Talking Straight with Nate says a running gag on Drew and Shimon's podcast is Bobby Wasabi from Disney's Kicking It. Yes, and Peter says that Yuji's name is Peter in it.
That's
Yes,
right. It
there
is
we go.
Peter.
There we go. So looking at this shot, here's another shot from Karate Kid 2. And we see Chosen there, obviously, with the nice clothes, with Sato. Now, this Sato here, the way he acts is almost Terry Silver-like.
Oh,
He
yeah.
owns the entire town, and if he doesn't get what he wants, he's willing to basically destroy the village.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
he wants different things than Terry Silver. He just wants, to see his honor upheld, to like have this death match with Miyagi. But he's very aggressive, and he's willing to sort of raise Tomi Village to the ground to get what he wants. And this is something, and maybe we could just talk about it right now because
Sure.
I know we've brought it up a few times. Terry Silver, we have him now in season 5. He is ascended to his full glory. He is taking over the valley, which is great for fans like us. We've always wanted to see this happen. Yes. We have Chosen, though. He's coming in. He's a good guy now. He's with Daniel and able to offer Daniel wisdom and help. But Chosen has seen firsthand growing up this type of attitude. He's seen his uncle work,
Yeah.
a ruthless businessman, willing to destroy to get what he wants, basically buying the entire village and charging rent to all the people, apparently okay with Chosen cheating them. Also, he's run the most successful dojo in Okinawa. He has trained
Oh,
the
yeah.
U.S. Armed Forces. Okay. Now, so Terry Silver would have learned, I don't know if we're going to get more into like where he learned what he knows from Kim Sung-young of South Korea, but it would be something very similar where you'd have a master in a dojo that would train U.S. military.
Mhm.
And so Chosen would be training directly under the guy who would be training people like Terry Silver.
Yeah.
So you have this like very similar background where Chosen might understand how someone like Terry Silver thinks.
Yep.
What are the possibilities you see here,
If
Drew?
if there's anyone that can get into the mind of like a Terry Silver-esque character, it's Chosen, and I think that's what's so exciting about him showing up in this season. Because Daniel, for all intents and purposes, is he can't get out of sort of the good side of the Miyagi teachings. We see it when he's interacting with his daughter. He doesn't want, Sam doing any of the Eagle Fang or Johnny teachings and all of that stuff. Daniel's very, very kind of set in his ways. And I think what's interesting about this is all the things that you mentioned about what Chosen grew up learning under these different teachers, training the military forces, learning how to run the business. Daniel kind of figured all of that stuff out, but he figured it out later in life, whereas Chosen grew up around this. And you even saw it in the previous seasons, in season 3, I believe, when they met with each other, the way that they sort of interacted with each other. And I think there's a fundamental differences in the character, which I think is needed to actually go up against somebody like Terry Silver. And you mentioned like the financials, just how to manipulate, how to get into his head. And I think Terry doesn't really know what he's going up against either. As much as I love Terry, I've got to say
Right.
he definitely is going to meet his match with somebody like Chosen. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see the dynamic between the two of them, and especially the way that you set that up. I think you nailed it.
So here's a question. Okay, you have Chosen, who was a bad guy. Okay, you have Terry Silver, who is a bad guy. All right, so
Mhm.
Chosen changed his ways. He was obviously had a very bad attitude, had the wrong skew on life, and changed that. His uncle came and saved him. And um, do you think Chosen remembers how to be a bad guy? Do you think he knows how to push like Terry Silver's buttons because he used to be a bad guy? Do you think he gets that? Do you think he'll do that, number one? Or do you think Terry is a better manipulator and might get into Chosen's head and be able to kind of mess with Chosen's sense of honor and I basically
Yeah.
find his weakness?
I think you raise a really good point, because as much as of a badass that Chosen is, he's
Right.
never gone up against anybody like Terry before, because Terry, on the other hand, is almost like Sato times a million when you think about it, right? Like he's not knocking villages down and stuff, but he's dumping toxic waste. I mean, that's
Right.
that's got environmental impacts across the globe, not
Right.
just sort of localized problems. But I think you brought up an interesting parallel here, and something that I was thinking a lot about. We talked a little bit about this, was how when Terry showed up in this past season, he was almost tofu Terry, we called him.
Right.
He was sort of like neutered, almost like sort of this kind of like inside of himself. He wasn't sure how to be this evil guy. I mean, we've got all kinds of people speculating about whether he intended that way or it was an act all along. I mean, take that aside,
Right.
we haven't really seen what Chosen has been up to. We just know that he's sort of kind of becoming an honorable person. We know that he's gone good, for lack of a better term. The way that Terry descended into madness in the previous season, it sort of came out of him, and Kreese brought that out of him, whether he wanted to or not. I'm curious about, is this going to have like the same effect on a character like Chosen, who
Mm.
is, for all intents and purposes, good now? Now you bring him out, and he's gotta kind of bring out the evil inside of himself, or I don't know, it's almost like you go toe to toe with the devil, so to speak,
Right.
and watching him have to bust it all out just to go against Terry, he's not gonna be able to leave anything behind if he's gonna take Terry out, because Terry is just the ultimate evildoer, and I think it'll be interesting to see if there's a parallel there. I don't know if you're getting that same vibe from it, what you've seen in the trailers and whatnot.
Right, right. Do you think what happens, do you think, when you drill down into Chosen and all his experiences and life experiences and who he is and what we've seen him do, willing to fight for the fight to the death, and you put him against Terry Silver and you drill down into Terry Silver, who do you think inside has what it takes to win?
I actually, as much as I love Terry, I have to give it to Chosen, because Terry's not about honor. Like Terry's about winning, right? But that's not necessarily about honor. And I think Chosen, as Peter brought up in the stream that we did last week, Chosen seems like the kind of guy that will put his life on the line to save somebody like Daniel and to stop sort of the madness that's happening in the valley here.
Right.
And I think if anyone's going to do that, I think he'll do it. Terry, I hate to use the pun, but Terry's a snake. Like, he's in for himself, and
Right.
he's not gonna put his life out there for anybody else. Whereas Chosen would probably sacrifice himself. As much as I don't want a character like him to actually die, I think it certainly could happen. And I think Peter raised a good point about that, because
Hmm.
deep down inside, Terry's, you mentioned it, he's a narcissist. He wants to
Right.
win, and I don't see that in Chosen. So I think that Chosen has what it takes to defeat Terry. And as much as I
Right.
hope it doesn't happen, I think.
Well, I want to get to all your guys' comments. I definitely want to point out Hayden Schlossberg, who is one of the creators of Cobra Kai. Thank you for joining us today,
Yes.
Hayden. It was great meeting you at Paley Fest, and I cannot wait. I know all of us cannot wait to see what happens in season 5. Hayden Schlossberg says Terry Silver fans can finally come out of the shadows, and now that we're out, it's our time to take over. My gosh, do you know how good that feels, like, to my soul to hear that?
Hayden,
Incredible.
thank you, and the rest of the folks so much, because the Terry Silver fans have been in the shadows for many years, and we got a lot of crap for loving Terry as much as we do. It's hard not to root for him, but I just got to say thanks for the steam room shot, because I said it before. You guys know, and we know, and the second I saw that, I jumped out of my chair. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you. And I know how TV shows go. I know how I have to write TV shows. I get it. But man, if there was some way for Terry to just kind of win,
I know.
that
Can
would
we
be.
please
Yeah, is that possible? Can we break the rules?
give us an alternate ending?
Yeah, I know. So thank you, Hayden. Appreciate the comment. Thanks for watching. Philomena says, don't forget that Daniel suffered at Cobra Kai and Silver's hands, and still has that fear of them now. Definitely PTSD material. Yeah, Drew, could this be a situation where Daniel goes off the rails and Chosen's the one that has to try to bring Daniel back?
He could, and I think the thing that we've seen is Chosen certainly has I don't want to call him like battle tested, but he's been in some pretty serious situations. I mean, he was willing to fight to the death. That was Daniel's first situation. That wasn't that was a non-tournament situation, right? They said this isn't a tournament. This is a fight to the death. And I think that does weigh on somebody, whereas Chosen grew up with all of this going on. So for him, this is just another day in the park, I think. I mean, I don't know what he's been up to since then, but I think it's certainly valid to say that maybe Chosen has to pull Daniel out of this. Seeing the Quicksilver method come back, at least what we think is the Quicksilver method, with the Tori situation hitting against the pipes and the doll there. I think this is really going to mess Daniel up, and I think it's going to give him a lot of sort of PTSD callbacks and nightmares. So I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with this, because Silver is such a master manipulator. I mean, there's not really a lot of villains like him in any type of medium. I think that this is really going to test Daniel's will. And I'm, as much as 2 raise the stakes, I'm so excited to see what Terry is going to be able to do, and that dynamic between these guys. Like, it's a fan's dream come true. And I think it's so exciting.
I totally agree. And dude says, I'm pro Terry all the way, but I think even he will have a hard time tricking Chosen. Then again, we might get some surprises, and Terry's good side might come back to the fold with Kreese gone. Do you think Terry has a good side, Drew?
I debated this a bunch of my, and I still about this, because as I want to say he would, the last part of me thinks like an act. I don't know. If you put, I think he tried, and I think that Kreese will pull him out of it. And something that Badway, my show, said to me today, which I thought was really insightful, was seeing Kreese sort of drag the Cobra Kai name through the mud just to kind of settle a feud here. Since the years happened, might have really triggered Terry. He doesn't want Cobra Kai to go out like that. He even said, I think it was the dinner scene when they were out to dinner with Kreese, he's like, you're getting into the same old messes here. Come on, man. Like, be smarter about this. Take it to the tournament. Terry wants to win. He wants to win. His vision of success is to have Cobra Kai dojos all over the valley. He's built this brand up. I know Kreese sort of started it too with him, but he's got this brand here that he thinks is worth more. He doesn't want to see it get thrown in the trash by these guys fighting 30-year-old grudges. So I think that's an interesting aspect of it, and I think it's something to watch going into the season. It could be an interesting way of where's Terry taking this business, so to speak.
Right. Rabana says Ralph has said his character will be off the rails for season 5,
Yeah.
kind of getting back to what we were talking about before. What do you think of this? Terry will try to economically bankrupt Daniel's dealership. Yeah.
I hope he does. I mean, not that I want Daniel to lose his money, but I think
Right.
it's an interesting angle. It's a total anti Bruce Wayne, like we said. I
Right.
would love to see that.
Right. Talking Straight with Nate says, and you're definitely onto something with Chozen having money. I thought that too, but I think Johnny may be able to help if he got an inheritance from Sid. That's interesting.
Yeah, that would be really interesting but I don't. Do you think that would happen? Because Sid didn't seem to think very highly of Johnny, and I think could be a situation where it's like, I'm not giving you anything. I don't know. It's a
Right.
weird situation.
Right. It's almost like he would have to have sort of like a deathbed reversal of attitude towards Johnny or something like that.
It's an interesting comment, though, for sure.
Yeah, it's a very interesting idea. Yes, I reckon Terry will convert the dealerships into dojos. I think that I think we mentioned that, or there's something someone in the chat brought that up when we were talking about the trailer. Like, is that a dealership?
Yeah.
It's a fun idea, I think. I'd love to see Terry just dominate.
There's no bigger disrespect than turning your business into his business. You take it over and turn it into something completely different.
Absolutely. But now Chozen, he actually, we'll put him back up here for a second. This is in the death match against Daniel. So obviously he was willing to fight to the death, but Chozen was teaching and very integral to Sato's dojo in Okinawa. And presumably he's been teaching, and we learn in Cobra Kai that he's still teaching. And so is this something where he might even have Terry beat as far as a teacher, someone who knows how to run a dojo and inspire confidence and loyalty in students? Like, obviously Terry, he makes a great speech, and I think he's a good teacher, but we see him putting Tori under the Quicksilver method, and that extreme technique might not work with keeping student retention, shall we say. Do you think Chozen might have an edge over Terry Silver, just as far as running a dojo in a franchise?
I think Terry's definitely got business sense, right? He's the CEO of a multinational corporation here, so he knows how to run a business, for lack of a better term. But I think the thing that he doesn't have is maybe the connection with other people, because he's such a narcissist, and I think he's out for himself. So having said that, I think Chozen can inspire the students more, whereas I think it's almost Terry will rule through fear and manipulation, which is, I mean, that's why we like him, right? Because he's so powerful. But I think at the same time, Chozen is a bit more of an inspirational character. Now, we don't know what has happened a lot since then. We know that he's sort of reformed, and the scene with him and Daniel back in the previous season showed a lot about who he is now. I think he's certainly a more like naturally charismatic person. He's more like straight laced, right? He's very serious and all that stuff, and he's got like the humor, like him with the size and all that kind of stuff was really funny. The way that the dynamic between him and Daniel. But I think when it comes to who are you going to follow, I think you're going to follow Terry out of fear and maybe like a loyalty or lack of messing up, which maybe Chozen had back in his day to his uncle. Right. But I think Chozen will understand what it's going to take to inspire the students, and I think he'll teach them some badass things. But I think it'll be more natural versus like fear based, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you put it beautifully. Yeah, as much as I'm a fan of Terry Silver, like you, and I know we said this before, but I'm kind of excited to see Chozen interacting with Terry Silver, and I too think Chozen might really have what it takes to deal with Terry Silver, because it almost looks like Chozen is now at Miyagi level, which Miyagi handled Terry Silver, very well.
I hope we get the picture that you had. I don't know if you have it handy, but the picture that you brought up of him in the fight to the death there. But God, that man, that outfit is so iconic to me. Like when I think about him wearing that, I think Peter's like picture is him with that outfit on.
Right.
I think it's so cool. It just reminds me of Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. And when I think about back in that day, it's like such an iconic look. I hope that we get that. We're getting the shirts. If somehow we get this in this season, I would be over the moon. So I hope we get that.
and I know that he still has this,
Yeah.
so like he still wears it occasionally, and I agree. I would love to see this.
So cool.
It is really cool. Um, let's see. We do have a couple questions. Okay, this gets back to the steam room from the trailer. I think it will be Daniel who Terry is talking to in the sauna, considering it was Daniel who he said that line to originally.
Yeah.
And which brings up the idea: could that steam room be at the country club? Could it be
Yeah.
at the Encino Oaks Country Club? Could Terry be invading? But it looks like Chozen's also now a member of the country club too. Like he's able to get in. So
Yeah.
it'd be interesting having these enemies meeting in this very civil area, where nothing can go wrong. They
Yeah.
can just talk. They can't fight. That's really interesting.
It's cool too, because like I think someone put in the chat, why would Daniel ever get into a sauna with Zoran says that with Terry. I mean, that's
Yeah.
probably why, if it was at the country club, especially what would be really cool is if, that's how Daniel finds out he's a member now. And it's like, oh,
Right.
hey, just this dude's here. And I hope he brings
Right.
out the Zach Morris cell phone somehow. They gotta have that. But I think that would be really cool, because it's like, surprise, buddy, here I am. And it's like, is there anything more menacing than that? A guy lurking in like, like the sauna. He's like gonna fight him there. He can't
Right.
fight him, but it's even more like offensive that he's there on his territory in his place, and he's like, I'm out to get you. And that's why we just love Terry so much, I think. So
Oh, of course, of course. Angelo says, I want to see how Chozen interacts with the LaRusso family in season 5. Could Chozen actually be a calming influence on Daniel and his whole family, do you think?
it certainly could be, especially with you look at what's going on with his son and everything there. Maybe, Daniel, honestly, I hate to say it, but he's sort of been an absent father, and he even admits it himself. He hasn't been paying attention to the kids as much. He's helping Sam out because she's doing, Miyagi-Do and learning. But at the same time, he's ignored his son. His son's kind of going off. And I guess they had a little bit of reconciliation at the last part of the season, but I'm curious to see if Chosen will then help Anthony and see where that goes. And that could
Right.
be really interesting angle that they could take too.
Yeah, yeah. Zoran says, imagine a group of badass martial artists fighting each other in the country club and doing a lot of damage to the building in the process. And talking straight with Nate say, I thought that was at the country club too.
Yeah.
Is this going to be the end of the Encino Oaks Country Club?
Oh my
like
God.
this season?
I like Stuart says the country club will be the Continental of the Karate Kid. I love John Wick. I'm a huge fan of the John Wick movies, so I love
Yep.
that idea. It's neutral territory.
Right.
If anyone makes a move there, then maybe it's on. But I love that idea.
Yes, that's amazing. Bryce Productions, congratulations. That is an achievement,
That's
getting a
awesome.
black belt in Taekwondo. Jorge says, what if Terry and Samantha had interactions in season 5 and Silver's presented as a shadow archetype evil counterpart to Sam? Let's consider Sam's season 4 arc and Terry's flashback in season 4, episode 3. Yeah. That's really interesting. The reason I love the show is like they've set up so many characters that really so many things could happen, like organically. We could go just a number of ways. And I think there are so many characters that we just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I like that the way that they've left the thread there, and they've done it, and they don't have to call back to it if they don't want to, but they put it there masterfully in a way that allows them to tap on it if they want. Like the way that they sort of set up, oh, who is Miguel's father? It might be nobody. There was a lot of people speculating, oh, maybe it's Mike Barnes. And I think we get into the whole, is everybody somebody's uncle or cousin or whatever. But I like that you could at least speculate on it because it's fun and you don't know yet. So I like how they're setting a lot of these storylines up, especially the Sam stuff. I'm really interested to see, is there going to be a Terry sort of taking over Sam's mind, especially with what we saw in the trailer and evil. I think that's cool. And Terry could Daniel.
Hey, sorry, Drew. It seems like you might be it seems like you might be breaking up. Sorry. I said sorry, and that brought up Siri. We'll get back to Drew in a second. Yes, that whole idea of Terry Silver potentially getting into Sam's brain is just so interesting. And you could see this as being sort of revenge against Daniel. If Daniel tries to go up against Terry Silver, that would be his ultimate revenge. Maybe it would be going after and sort of like converting his daughter to Cobra Kai. And just the idea that she's trying to make her way out of that or try to make sense of that, that's just such an interesting struggle. And I'm very excited to see how that goes down. I don't know if that's going to be part of it, but it seems like that's at least implied. Something like that's going to happen. How you doing, Drew?
Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
All
Yeah,
right, there we go. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, you're fine. I want to give you an opportunity to finish your thought on that. On Sam
Yeah,
and
no,
the dark side.
I don't know where it cut out, but I guess the big thing that I think is just really interesting is if Terry wants to be the Terry that we know, and they
Right.
want him to be the Terry that we know, that
Right.
manipulation of Daniel's daughter, and especially since she's been struggling with good versus evil, I'm just really excited to see where that's going to go.
Okay. Yes, I totally agree. And so this has me thinking, because we've been talking about Chosen, and now we're talking about Terry Silver again. I guess at some point he was a henchman in Karate Kid 2. So if we tried to rate him as a villain, he probably wouldn't stack up against Terry Silver.
It'd be
But
tough.
but the thing is, are you and I both prepared to say today that we think that Chosen could be as much or more than a match for Terry Silver?
Man, that's a loaded question. I think he certainly could, put it that way,
Yeah.
because I think based on everything that you said earlier with the money, what he grew up with, understanding how to run a business. I mean, training servicemen to, fight. And that's not just a small thing, right? Those
Right.
guys need to be prepared to fight to the death. Did Terry really learn to fight to the death? I guess he did back in Vietnam,
Right.
but what was his style, and how was he doing that from a Cobra Kai standpoint? I think the stakes were higher for Chosen throughout his time growing up, at least what we've seen of him and the martial arts aspect of it. Are there any higher stakes than being in Vietnam and possibly dying? Probably not. But at the same time, Terry's had many years since then. So I'm curious to see, will Chosen bring back all of those teachings, and will
Right.
he go for the throat of Terry? And I think he certainly could. So I don't know. I think he could match up against him. As much as it pains me to say, he might, man. He might.
Okay. So, Drew, we've got Hayden Schlossberg, genius, co-creator of Cobra Kai, throwing a little
Yeah.
wrench into this. He's saying, I know we like unhinged Terry, but an older, wiser Terry is even more dangerous. He will not take silly risks like take a point anymore. He's laser focused and determined, which is really fascinating because, I know we wish we could actually talk to Hayden and ask him about Terry and the intervening years, because, we've been talking about like what happened with Dynatox, what
Mhm.
happened with him? What did he do? Why is he wiser now? We see that he's not as nuts. But you know, this is so intriguing. The idea that he's learned a lot. He's
Yeah.
not his younger self.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Drew. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I gotta say, like, to Hayden, like, they've done an amazing job writing a nuanced character. There's so much. I'm a huge fan of 3, as you all know, but I think a lot of the knock on that was that, oh, it's just this kind of cartoony villain, and we all knew that there's a lot more than that. But I think writing of this show proven that he has, and you saw we talked about the dinner scene in Grease, just trying to explain to Grease, listen, you have to talk about this stuff. This is more more than just going to edge here. So I think a really, really point. Obviously, these are this whole thing. But at the same time, that older Harry is exciting, and it's because he knows to take these students, and the fact that Harry is sort of in the back, it's even more epic. He's much smarter than he's been over the 20, 30 years last year.
Absolutely. So really, it's interesting. We've got Chosen, who's gotten older and wiser. He's
Yeah.
learned from his uncle. He was saved by his uncle. He has a well-rounded sense of himself. And then we have Terry Silver, who, was kind of supervillain Dynatox, dumping toxic waste,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, torturing teenagers and old men. But now he was able to reform his life or live in society, hold down relationships if he wanted to, charm people, and really kind of have his version of a well-rounded life with lots of wealth. And
Yeah.
so I guess the question is, who's got it now? Who has a better sense of humanity, and who's got it inside?
Yeah, I'm curious if like someone mentioned earlier in the chat, like, will we see sort of the good side of Terry kind of fighting as well? I think,
Right.
yeah, Peter's comment there is really good too.
Right.
I
Right.
think that's an interesting aspect because maybe Chosen is not older and wiser too. Like, I don't know which way are they going to show him go, and is he
Right.
going to basically? We talk about gasoline. I'm gasoline. The epic
Right.
line from the trailer. Like he's willing to risk it all. I mean, life or death, and I think that's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, Terry's also a businessman. He's a very successful businessman. Maybe he won't, maybe to what Hayden was saying,
Yeah,
he's older and wiser. And so he'll know when to push things and when not to push things. And maybe, if he's legitimately beaten and doesn't have a way out, he might not, go for broke. He might not really challenge people in fights to the death.
yeah.
Maybe he'll bow out and go back into the shadows and come up with a new plan,
And then maybe that's the season 6, him
right.
scheming scheming.
That's great. And yeah, and that's one thing, I'll say this too, if Hayden or is still watching or anyone. It's, what I love about the idea of Terry Silver being out there and lurking. It's honestly kind of one of the things that kept me going through the first
Yeah,
seasons of Cobra Kai. It's the idea that he's lurking. And
yeah,
so I kind of hope, even if he goes away after season 5, that he's still lurking out
yeah.
there.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more dangerous than applauding like wiser, older Terry Silver with all of the experience that he's had, and
Right.
I think we've seen with John Kreese, he's as wise as he is, you got Terry who's even wiser, and Terry just knows how to operate in these scenarios. And
Right.
I think the cool thing about Terry is, the business sense that he's got, as you mentioned, Ken, and like just the experience that he's had over these years, like he's ruthless.
Right.
And put that up against gasoline and fire. The line is so fitting. It's just so fitting.
Oh, absolutely. And Ken Cap's about to lose signal. Thanks for the content, fellas. Hope to see you back in the plains chasing storms again in the near future. Take care. Thank you, Ken. And I appreciate that. I know that all my content has been about Cobra Kai, but guys, if you don't know, I've have a huge background in producing documentaries and series on storm chasing and tornadoes. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. Tornado Chasers is my series. It's not on this channel. You can see it on Prime. But for all of you who love tornadoes, maybe we'll have a tornado discussion someday, and we'll talk about that too. But so Drew, this episode, as it's tends to do on this channel, has kind of gone towards Terry Silver because we love talking about Terry Silver. But before we wrap up today, do you have any final thoughts on Chosen? So just things that maybe people who are new to the character should kind of take away from our talk today while thinking about what might happen in season 5.
Yeah. Think what's cool is making it back. So I mentioned, I promise I'll talk about Chosen. I think the cool about how Terry was in Korea and he backed and see where he. I think the cool when you look at Karate and the legacy.
Hang on a
Has,
second, Drew. Your signal's going in and out.
oh.
We'll wait for your signal to recover just a little bit.
Okay.
But I think one of the most interesting things for me is that Chosen in many ways was sort of like a younger. He had a lot of the same qualities and access to money and resources and training, and also kind of a very aggressive form of karate and mindset, willing to fight to the death. And so he has a lot of qualities maybe in him that he might recognize in Terry Silver. I'm sure he maybe he's seen a few in his uncle back in the day. Maybe he's seen some in the people that his uncle did business with, kind of like the ruthlessness. So he is someone maybe who has a lot of experience, not only in martial arts, but in life and seeing how people can go wrong, because he's gone wrong himself. So I think he makes an amazing match for Terry Silver. That's kind
Yeah.
of my thought going into season 5.
Yeah.
What do you think, Drew?
Hopefully I'm back. I'm sorry about the
Yes,
connection.
you are clear and back.
No, I think you nailed it. I think the cool thing about this and the opportunity that we get for somebody like a fan of Karate Kid of the series and looking at Karate Kid 2, Chosen is more than a bully. And I think you saw in Karate Kid 2, a lot of people may have categorized him as a bully. And yeah, he was willing to fight to the death. But I think what's really cool about him is, like we said about Terry and how he's got all this nuance and he's older and wiser, as Hayden put it. Where is Chosen? I think he could be also older and wiser. We've seen him reformed and kind of we got a taste of that in the previous season. But I think what's really exciting about this is he's more than just this Sato's nephew and Sato's, he's this bully that's trying to get against Daniel. I think the exciting thing is watching him team up with Daniel, and the fact that he is the type of person that could go toe to toe with Terry because of his business sense, because of his ruthlessness, because of the experience that he has. So for someone who's a huge fan of the series, I just can't wait to see where they're going to go with this. It's just so exciting, and I hope you all go back and watch Karate Kid 2 now, because it's an amazing movie.
Yes, and if you do, Ben called it. Here's a quote: "Maybe trouble looking for you." That's a classic quote from Chozen. So everyone, really want to thank you all for watching today. It's such a pleasure to have you. Thanks for all of your great discussion in the chat. Thank you, Hayden Schlossberg, for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure. And Drew, I hope we could do this again. I think we will be back next week. We'll talk about something else. But thank you, Drew, for joining us today. Everyone, go check out the Last Row podcast with Drew and Badway. Their new episode is big, but they've done episodes on Terry Silver and Steven Seagal and all these great movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, go check out the Last Row podcast. You will love them. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And also watch out for my interview with William Christopher Ford, Dennis from Karate Kid 3. That is coming this week as well. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a great Saturday.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.